Hello everybody, Prepper003 here today with another topic for you, and this one is going to be small unit tactics for preppers. Now right now I know that there's a lot of information to cover in small unit tactics, so right now I'm going to break this up into multiple sections. But right now I'm going to pretty much talk about one of the big aspects, and that's going to be leadership in this one, and kind of just a bare introductory into the small unit tactics and what it covers. So let me start off by just kind of defining what small unit tactics is. Small unit tactics are the application of military doctrine for combat deployments of platoon levels or below size elements for strategic or logistic environments. Now, this particularly goes and involves into these kind of unit size, which is going to be platoons, which can be anywhere from around 16 to 50 men. Then you're going to go down into more of a squad, which can be 8 to 24 men. Then even further down into that, which is going to be your fire team, which can be anywhere from 2 to 4 men as well. And then there's a lot of different variations on that as well, especially whenever you get into different branches. They have their own sizes on fire teams, on squads, sections, and platoons, and then even more whenever you get into other things as well. But for preppers, I'm going to kind of just limit it to this pretty much basis, just because I do not see a lot of preppers, even militia groups, utilizing more than 50 men at a time, just because not a lot of them get that kind of attendance out or get that kind of groupage. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is going to be pretty much TTP, or tactics, techniques, and procedures. Now, when it comes into the leadership aspect, they need to be able to understand the tactics, which is the employment and order of arrangements of the forces in relation to each other, which, having effective tactics, translates into combat power, into decisive results. This is primarily into like offensive, defensive, and stability tasks by your combat force, or by your prepper group, if you will. The next one is going to be the techniques. The techniques are taking those tactics and using them and integrating them into several different techniques to be performed, and also into different ways and tasks to perform those techniques as well. Then you're going to get on to procedures. Procedures are going to be pretty much the standards in which they detail the steps of the techniques and into the tactics. So pretty much what that does, that is giving you pretty much the basis line of what the leadership and what your group's process is going to be for doing what they need to do. It's going to describe what tactics you guys are going to utilize, pretty much the techniques that you are going to relay those tactics into doing, and then lastly is going to be the procedures in which you follow out using those techniques. So it's pretty much like a basic flow chart, if you will. Now that I've got a little bit of that done, I want to just touch on some of the things that preppers can do when it comes to leadership, and what they're going to have to pretty much kind of think of when it comes to leadership. Not all preppers have joined the military, or like me, or unable to join the military due to some type of medical issues or some type of other type of thing, maybe a criminal history or something along that type of line. But just going on to that, so yeah, they have to pretty much find different outlets. And some of the ways that they can do that is getting different types of books that you can get whenever it comes to small unit tactics, and reading them and actually understanding them and taking notes on them to pretty much allow you to be able to more deeply understand that, and also to be able to not just understand the basics. A lot of people just think that small unit tactics just involves just small unit formations out in the field and everything, but there's a lot more to it. So having a deep understanding of that for preppers is going to be key whenever it comes to this type of stuff. Another thing is that when it comes to this and comes to leadership, especially if you're going to be the leader of your group, you need to have a much better understanding when it comes to what you're going to be doing, and especially if you're going to be leading. So getting professional training at some type of professional school. Right now, thankfully, I was able to get a pretty basic and semi-well-rounded amount of this, training with some veterans in the militia, and also training and reading and doing other things on my own time as well. I know I'm going to be going and taking some professional small unit classes as well to get a more hands-on rather than just being in the militia. But right now I just kind of wanted to share my experience with some of the fellow preppers out there that don't have any basic understanding and kind of get that overestimation of themselves and think that they're just going to lone wolf it out against a group of attackers that attack their location and think that they're just going to pretty much John Wick the entire situation. So now I just wanted to go on that tangent and just make sure that everybody was getting a good understanding on where I was coming from. Now, the biggest thing that I want to cover now is going to be the leadership, as I mentioned. And this is going to be the core aspect of this topic. Now, leadership, starting with the 2 points, 3 points here is going to be leading. You're going to want to be able to have a lot of experience leading them as a group, and you're going to want to be able to have a well-rounded group. So you're pretty much going to want to be familiar with all the members in that group, be familiar with all of their types of quirks, and also have them used to you leading them, and also being a teacher to them as well. The next is going to be planning. And what I mean by planning is you're going to have to be able to plan all these different types of operations, whether it be offensive, defensive, or stability, and also understand what you're doing with each one, and understand the limitations that I'm going to talk into later. Then the last one is going to be conducting the ops. But let me just jump back into the planning for a second here and give you. I have a little list here just to kind of give you guys a more detailed example on that. Now, when it comes to planning, the actual leader needs to understand the situation that they're in. So what do I mean by understanding the situation? They need to understand what the situation is, whether it be an EMP, a localized SHTF situation, kind of like the Ukraine Civil War, things like that, and they need to understand what they have for supplies, what their troop capability is, and what pretty much the capability is of their terrain and everything else. The next thing is whenever they start to understand their plan, and they need to visualize what they're going to do. And they need to pretty much kind of visualize how they're going to do it, how they're going to go about it, what they're going to need for that operation, whether it be offensive, defensive, or just being and trying to stabilize your situation for living and operating. Then is going to be having to describe that situation to your fellow troop members or your fellow preppers in your prepper group. And you're going to want that whenever you describe it, you're going to want it to be very specific. You're going to want to be able to cover all the key points, be able to answer all of the members' questions, and be able to have it well drawn out. The next thing is going to be directing everybody. And what I mean by directing everybody is you're going to want to be right there alongside them, being able to direct them on what you're going to want to do, and also being able to direct them on the described plan on where you want each individual member to fill their role. Now, as I mentioned before, leading. You're going to want to be there alongside them, being able to make the plan, being able to help work them through the process in the field and what's going on, which is going to lead into assessing, because things don't always go as planned. So you're going to need to assess the situation, fall back on some of the fallback plans, or completely change the plan altogether depending on the situation, as mentioned before, which comes back into the original one is being able to understand the situation. Which comes into is conducting the ops. With using all of this right here for your planning stage, then you come over to actually conducting it, following out the mission, and getting that done and taken care of. Which is going to move on into is going to be your elements of combat power here. Now right now you have pretty much your mission command, which is going to be you as a leadership. Maybe you have a couple other people that are in your prepper community. If you have a community that are kind of also in there as well, they're involved in the community's protection and the community's stabilization as well. So you might have a few more members than just you as a core leadership in your mission command. Then you have these 5 outer points, which are going to be your troop movement and maneuvers, which is going to be pretty much self-explanatory, the movements and ways you're going to go about maneuvering through the terrain and environments. The next thing is going to be a big one, which is going to be intelligence, because intelligence is going to actually help the leadership tell what they're going to do with their planning, what the risk factors is going to be, and how they're going to go about with their movements and maneuvers, depending on what the intel is. Then there's going to be fires, which is going to be kind of almost out of the situation really for most preppers, because that's going to involve indirect fire like mortars, air support, things like that. So we mostly have a lot of that. You may have it, which would be good on you, and that's a good actual extra tier for your preps, but a majority of people won't. Then over here, just kind of move out of your way, is going to be sustainment. And with sustainment is self-explanatory, as well as going to be how you're going to be able to sustain your members. You're going to need food, logistics planning, way to resupply your ammunition, resupply your food, your gear, and everything else. So sustainment is a big one. Then the last one is going to be protection, how you're going to protect the members of the community and also the members of your troop or your prepper community or militia. And this is going to be a multiple tiered way of doing it, going about having area defense, mobile defense, retrograde ops, which can be delay, withdraw, or retire the troop depending on the situation. But having a way to protect your unit is going to be very key. Now, I want to talk quickly about limitations here. A good leader is going to be able to have to decide what his troop is going to be capable of with their limitations. Especially when we talk about preppers, a lot of us don't have a vast resource like a actual nation military or even a small actual military unit. We might have a little bit more in capability of being able to pre-plan things, long out, having years and years and years, but we might not be able to have the quick resupply or the ready troops. For example, individual level. Not everyone is going to be the most physically fit. As I'm sure a lot of you have seen, a lot of preppers are overweight, a lot of them are getting on in the years. So having members of your community that are going to be younger, more fit, or maybe if you do not have those younger, fitter members, maybe having to boost your group's actual physical capabilities and the also individual training level. And what I mean by individual training level is their actual capability. They're training in marksmanship, they're training in land navigation, they're training in a whole bunch of different fields. Those are just a couple of the ones that I want to talk about, just because those are two basic ones. But basic marksmanship and land navigation are going to be key. Myself, I have a very crappy sense of direction, so land navigation is one of my harder aspects. So right now that's one that I've realized is a limitation for me, and that's one I'm still working on growing, and I'm constantly trying to improve myself on. So that's why on the individual level, we need to be thinking about that, especially in our community and being the core leader in our prepper group. The next one is going to be on a more troop level. Like, for example, is going to be how fast your troop can move, how effective they are in your team coordination, how often do you guys get together and train. So having your guys' capability as a troop is going to really either give you guys a boost or is going to really hit you guys in what you guys are capable of doing. So you just have to realize on what your troop is capable of and what the individual level carries into the troop capability. The next thing is going to be equipment. Now, this can either be a good thing or a bad thing depending on kind of how you approach it. But for the most part, a lot of civilians can purchase a much better variety of gear than the military has, or even your general law enforcement. The problem is that we do not have a direct resupply on that gear. So if gear breaks, gear wears over time, or if something happens, you have to bug out, you lose that gear. All of a sudden now you need to be able to operate with minimal gear and also be able to repair gear as well. If not, have fallback supplies for that kind of thought process as well. So you kind of have to think about what you guys are capable of by your gear. So, for example, you guys aren't going to be conducting a raid or some type of ambush if you guys only have a couple of handguns and a shotgun. You're going to want to try to avoid the conflict and try to pretty much just observe and maybe avoid the overall conflict, if you will. So your equipment is going to give you guys, and also the amount of ammunition is going to kind of limit on what you guys are capable of as well. The next thing is going to be the limitation of your terrain that you're in. So you're going to, like, for example, if you have very mountainous terrain, that's going to limit how fast you guys are going to be able to go. So that's also going to limit where your bug out location is. It's also going to kind of affect where you guys are going to be moving. If you guys are going to be moving on trails, if you guys are going to be mountaineering and rappelling or abseiling. So you just kind of have to realize that your terrain can hamper you or can be of benefit to you as well, especially depending on if you use the terrain to your advantage. The last thing is going to be the enemy force. And this can be a limitation to you because if you have an overwhelming actual enemy force, you might not be able to conduct yourself in a way that you might want to. For example, if you have an enemy force of armored units coming in, and all you've got is basic small arms like a couple of AR-15s and a couple of bolt guns, you're going to have a really hard time trying to do anything against that. So maybe you might be able to improvise something, may have pre-planned that and have a situation to where you have your pretty much booby traps. You might have anti-armor things set up in your area, which comes back into the terrain. But that's just an example on what can be a huge disadvantage to you when it comes to an enemy force. Now that I've talked kind of about that and on to the pretty much the basics into the leadership, I wanted to just discuss into a little bit of the planning of this and just kind of give you guys a brief example, if you will, on planning for a SHTF scenario. And right now I've talked a lot about it with other people on social media, and I've also just kind of looked in, and a lot of people seem to overestimate their planning capabilities and their individual capabilities as well. For example, I'll put it up on the screen for you. Somebody recently posted in a prepper group that I'm in how they would be able to pretty much defend themselves against a 100 thick man heavily armored force. Well, 100 men is a lot of men, and that can be very overwhelming on a small unit, especially if you guys are only maybe a squad level. Now, the good thing is if you're in a defensive situation, it takes a lot more people to fight against a heavily dug in force than it does a actual force assaulting. So being in the defensive position can be an advantage to you. Also knowing the terrain as well. So the planning can be very key in your guys' chances of survival in an SHTF situation. So I just kind of threw up a random kind of just something I just thought of here to give you guys a little example on planning. So right here, I'm just going to give you guys a quick description of what's going on here. Here is going to be pretty much your main bug out location, your headquarters, if you will. You have pretty much a section, or you have pretty much two squads capable force here for defending this property. Here is going to be a road. Then there's a, as you can see where I have drawn it, you're on a hill. I'm trying to give you guys the most optimal situation for being able to, being in a defensive situation. So you have a river here cutting off a direct attack from the rear. You have one pretty much area here where there is a bridge to go across there. You have some kind of deer trails coming in here from the sides and the back. This is kind of like a hunting cabin, or if you will, or kind of a off in the woods, very secluded location. What you have here is going to be defensive positions and giving you an all-around defense of your property. Maybe you have a good 20, 50 yards here, and then you come into a heavily wooded area where there's a lot of underbrush. So you are going to be limiting your areas of approach here from the enemy force. Then you have these areas here where you're going to be coming, you have a chances of coming in because human nature is to take the area of least resistance. So well, there's a very good chance that somebody could come on approach from the heavily thick area. There's a lot higher chance that they're going to be coming through these trails, especially if you haven't made it to where there's up armored and everything, but you just put a couple of layered signals to where maybe you have a string that attaching to a flare, some type of tripwire alarm, something along that type of thing, or maybe some booby traps in there to kind of give you a heads up warning that there is a enemy force approaching. Maybe if you have the amount of force, you can set up some LPOPs, or listening posts and observation posts. So that way you can easily tell of incoming traffic. Maybe having some type of camera set up as well if you have that type of technical capability. Then for the heavy main approach, like for the driveway, say there's only one way of approach, or one avenue of approach, if you will, from the driveway, maybe putting up some vehicles in a staggered area to where they can't just drive up on you, to where they're going to have to, for example, the enemy force is going to have to maneuver around those vehicles to approach your main area of operation, or your main AO or living area. And what that does is that gives you the heads up time and also the capability of opening fire on them from a heavily fortified position. And what I have right here is pretty much like a machine gun, if you will, or it could be you have a battle rifle with a 50-round drum and a couple of extra drums on the side to be able to light that vehicle up. Maybe you have a 50 cal, maybe you have a belt fed, but something that's going to be able to lay down substantial amount of firepower on an approaching vehicle. And then it comes down into is going to be your fallback positions. Having your pretty much your predetermined fallback positions. So for example, you guys receive, there's an enemy force that's pretty much set up on this side of the open field here. I'm just going to say, for example, it's, just for the sake of it, 2 squads thick. So right now, you get a pincer movement of them approaching from the north and then coming around and approaching from the south. So right now, I'm just going on like worst case scenario. They actually take the time, they hit you guys in the morning or right at dusk, so that you guys are at your pretty much the most vulnerable state. If they don't have night vision, then they attack at night. But pretty much a pincer attack, and they're having pretty much, they're overwhelming you guys. Maybe they have a platoon size element there for you, and they're just overwhelming you guys. Their ambush pretty much had a very big effect. They wiped out a majority of your guys' forces, especially on the security exchange. So now what are you guys going to do? You guys have to pretty much, if you don't want to get, because they're just overwhelming you guys may have to retreat or pretty much try to withdraw from the situation. So you might have a couple of members that are going to be delaying their situation, but a majority of you guys might have to fall back to a rally point in the rear. Maybe you guys have a couple of different rally points set up all throughout the area. Just as an example. So you guys have areas that might have set up a cache of supplies. You might have extra gear set up there. You might have to ditch a weapon. If it gets really bad and movement is preferable over to firepower, especially if it's in such an overwhelming situation like this. But this is just an example, and just kind of giving you guys a thought process to think about. And especially when it comes down to this right here, having a lot of planning and pre-thought out elements to it is going to be very key for you guys in your survival situation and also into your capabilities. So right now this is pretty much, and like I said, this is very basic here what I'm setting up. There's nothing too heavily thought out into this. I just kind of drew up to give you guys a general idea on pre-planning and how this goes on into the overall leadership aspect and into conducting your operations as a prepper community and maybe as a militia. So I want to hear back from you guys on what you guys think on how you guys go about it, especially when into integrating small unit tactics. If you guys have thought about integrating small unit tactics into your overall group capability, or if you guys have really even thought about it at all. And if you got, and maybe some of you that are more experienced than I am of it, kind of give us a little more few examples in the comment section on some ways that you guys can improve upon your guys' planning process and maybe improving on your guys' capability as a team rather than trying to think about it as an individual. Because when it comes to small unit tactics, you need to be a strong individual, which is going to make a strong team. But having a strong team coordination is going to be very key, because you can have a good amount of individuals, but if you have no team coordination, that's going to be a very big fallback to you in the long run. So I really appreciate you guys watching. I'm really looking forward to hearing the comments section on this, because it's something that a lot of preppers really don't talk about. They kind of just think that it's going to be like a John Wick scenario where you're going to have the enemy just march across an open field here, and you're going to be able to just plink them off as they're walking across that field. When in reality, a lot of this stuff is very simple when it comes to the overall thought process of it. and a very simple-minded enemy could easily think of a way to ambush you and in which is the proper time to ambush you. So I really want to hear what you guys have to think, and I really appreciate you guys watching. Remember, those that prepare for today survive tomorrow.